Hello, this is D, and I'm back with another video, and today we're on the third day of FTC versus Microsoft. Today we're going to see Jim Ryan on the stand, as well as Nvidia and an economic expert representing the FTC. Now, I gotta tell you guys, today is going to be a doozy. The information that has dropped in court is mind-boggling. If you thought this case was crazy last week, you haven't seen anything yet. So today we start off with Jim Ryan on the stand, and I'm going to cover it from Florian Mueller. Later on, we'll go into some of Tom Warren's coverage. Now, Florian goes on to say we see Jim Ryan against a blue background videotape deposition of April 6, 2023, wearing a greenish jacket, blue tie. He goes on to say Ryan is presently in Japan meeting a game developer with whom he did a skip the type Xbox game deal. He's the CEO of a company whose headquarters is close to the courtroom that any other company involved here. Now, apparently, I don't know, he's like maybe 35 minutes away from the courtroom, and he decided not to show. Now, I'll give you guys a little bit of a spoiler today. You're gonna know why he didn't show after you hear his testimony, because all of the information that is known now, Microsoft's lawyers would have ripped him to shreds on the stand. Anyways, let's get into it. So Ryan is explaining why he thinks Nintendo is not in the same market as Sony and Xbox. He goes on to say this is a softball interview with the FTC, what they're doing with Jim Ryan. Tried everything to make him comfortable, to ask him questions that would allow him to make an anti-ABK deal talking points. Nevertheless, he took his time to reflect and spoke slowly. Ryan says confidential information about the PS technology could leak in other parts of Microsoft if they could develop similar features that we invented. And this is when he was talking about why withhold the PlayStation consoles, or I should say dev kits of the PlayStation 5 to the Minecraft team. And like we've seen in the media lately, Call of Duty if Microsoft purchased Activision and the deal goes through. Ryan said Sony would not rely on any contract when it's about their principal competitor getting information on a new PlayStation technology. So they're saying they don't care if there's contracts in place. If Microsoft owns Activision and Call of Duty developers, they're probably going to leak that information to Microsoft. And I gotta say, maybe that's a fair point. I think there's ways around it where you could ship a system that is not quite the next generation system that you're going to release, but will have the core features so that you can do stuff on it, and then at a later date you can announce some of those features. So there are ways around it. I think it's a little bit of a stretch. I'm not going to say it's not a full concern. I understand these guys are very competitive, but it's a little bit of a stretch. Now, Ryan answers the FTC's questions on whether he expressed to Phil Spencer any concerns over the continued availability of Activision titles on the PlayStation, but we know his internal reaction was that there was no reason for concern. Okay, we're going to switch over to Tom Warren's coverage here, and he starts off saying that Judge Corley brought to everyone's attention that one person was live streaming the audio last week. Now, we know who that was. I'm not even going to say his name on the channel, and it was so irresponsible of him. And I'll be honest with you guys, this person was even trying to get streams behind a paywall. So it got blocked, and then they put it behind a paywall. Unbelievable. So the judge addressed them. It's illegal to stream this. If it was legal to stream it, I'd be streaming it daily. I wouldn't be spending 8 hours of my day trying to edit and cram all of this information in. We know this. It was said before. And even if you have a link to the audio of the court, it says it right there in the documents. So that was a bonehead move. Anyways, let's go on. Now, Jim Ryan confirms that Sony tracks Microsoft's console sales. The FTC asks, how have Xbox Gen 9 consoles performed in terms of sales? Ryan, like us, they have been troubled by supply shortages, and we understand, but demand for the product is robust. Now, he went on to say that the Xbox is selling well and that it's very popular in the US. Now, Ryan was asked why Xbox games resonate better with consumers in the US outside of the country. Many of their games involve an element of shooting and online multiplayer, both of which typically are more popular in the US than they are outside of the US. And I do agree with that. It's really known for its shooters in the US. We do love our shooters on Xbox, that's for sure. And we like our multiplayer component to the games. And in the console wars, when guys are saying stuff towards each other's brands, those are some of the things that they say. The Sony guys will say, oh, you guys don't have exclusive. And the Xbox guys will say, oh, you guys, games are one and done. You don't have any multiplayer. You don't have good shooters on your platform. So I guess that's where that comment is coming from. Now, Jim Ryan believes Nintendo is in a different market. The FTC and Microsoft have been battling over whether Nintendo Switch is a game console or whether it competes with the PlayStation and Xbox. Sony's PlayStation chief, Jim Ryan, says we consider Nintendo to participate in a different market segment than Xbox and PlayStation, and he was asked to expand on that. He goes on to say Nintendo hardware technology is of much a less sophisticated nature to PlayStation or Xbox. Its hardware typically retails for a cheaper price, and its audience is aimed rather younger. Now, that's false. Nintendo players, yeah, they have a lot of young Nintendo players for sure. But all the guys that were lining outside of GameStop and all of these stores lined up for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, they weren't little kids. They were grown adults. I know a lot of adults that play a Switch. I play a Switch. Yes, my kids play it too, but I also play it from time to time. So that is a very false statement. Sure, it's not in the same segment of power as a PlayStation or an Xbox. I'll give them that, but it's still a console. And in fact, they're selling the most consoles right now. How are they not competition? It just doesn't make sense. Now, once again, this is the FTC questioning Jim Ryan here. Microsoft's lawyers, they're going to get a chance to get in some questions. Now, I got to say that this is the FTC questioning Jim Ryan here, so they're going to ask him very easy questions. We're going to get some tougher questions when Microsoft cross-examines Jim Ryan, so it will get spicy. Trust me. Now, they go on to ask, is it beneficial to have third-party exclusives on the PlayStation? And Jim Ryan responds, it's beneficial for a third-party developer to sign an exclusive deal for PlayStation because development efforts required to make the game reduces. Now, they also go on to ask him what are his thoughts of these games being removed for the system. And he was like, Redfall, I'm not really for it. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. I don't find it anti-competitive. Starfield, I don't like that it's an exclusive, but I don't find it anti-competitive. I don't know why he's saying he doesn't like that it's an exclusive when you have the most exclusives on your platform. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Now they go into Jim Ryan and Phil Spencer's emails. Phil Spencer sent Jim Ryan an email, a committed list of gamers last year that would remain on the PlayStation after the proposed Activision Blizzard deal closes. The list included Overwatch, but not Overwatch 2. Other Activision games on the PlayStation must sufficiently be broad to fully align with gamers' expectations. This was said in Ryan's reply to the email. He calls it not a meaningful list in the deposition. So according to Jim Ryan, in August, the alarm bells started to ring. He says this happened August 26, 2022 from Phil Spencer. He really set the alarm bells ringing inside of Sony. Up until that point, Sony hadn't negotiated an access agreement. Microsoft argues Sony didn't have any initial concerns after January 31st proposed email and calls to Sony CEO and Jim Ryan. I was particularly happy with the January 31st proposal, but hope that it was an opening salvo, said Ryan. I believe this transition is bad for competition. Now, they were asked about Sony's meeting with the UK regulators in the summer of 2022. Was it before or after Spencer's email? Jim Ryan can't recall with certainty, had one meeting with the CMA over the summer. So now you're starting to see a shift as Microsoft lawyers are starting to question Jim Ryan. You're starting to see that it's unraveling. And this is kind of the theme of this whole trial. I shouldn't say trial. I don't know why I keep saying that. This whole hearing, this has been the same theme. The FTC, they raise some points and Microsoft's lawyers come in and unravel everything almost instantaneously. It's really crazy. Now, this is where he was asked about Starfield and Redfall, and he said that there isn't anything wrong with Microsoft doing exclusives like Redfall. He says, I don't like it, but I can't have an argument with it. What about Starfield? I don't like it, but I don't view it as anti-competitive. Now, this guy can be saying anything about not liking exclusives. As I alluded to earlier, Sony has the most exclusives out of everybody. And the hypocrisy from Jim Ryan here is unbelievable. And it's on display in the courts. And it's on display for everybody to see. For years, we've been saying this about Sony. And people say, oh, you're crazy, or you're fanboying, or it's, you're in denial. This is how you're coping with it. When it's been the facts. Microsoft is trying to compete. Sony money hats a lot of games. Like, they pay for them not to be on Xbox. The most recent example is Final Fantasy 16, which, by the way, is roasting a lot of PlayStation 5s, but that's neither here nor there. So it's just hypocrisy coming out of the mouth of Lion Jim Ryan. Anyway, so Microsoft lawyers bring up to Jim Ryan meeting with the Activision CEO Bobby Kotick on the same day as the European Commissioner on February 21st. We previously heard that Ryan had said to Kotick, "I don't want a new Call of Duty deal, I just want to block your merger." Jim Ryan confirms the meeting and what he said, and this is the bombshell. "I told him that I thought the transaction was anti-competitive, that I hoped the regulators would do their job and block it." Ryan says that Kotick wanted to cover himself by extending a marketing collaboration with Sony if Microsoft's Activision Blizzard deal was blocked. Now, Kotick said to Jim Ryan, "Listen, I'll stay on after the merger to make sure everything goes smoothly for this transition, that Sony continues to get Call of Duty on your platform. Don't worry, I'll make sure everything is okay." This is after Microsoft, Phil Spencer, everybody over there was saying, "Listen, Call of Duty is going to remain on the PlayStation." But now all of a sudden he has a change of heart. His mind was changed. Now Call of Duty is bad and it has to be on the PlayStation. In fact, Microsoft is going to remove it from the PlayStation, which is going to be disastrous for our brand, when it doesn't make financial sense to even remove it from the PlayStation. But he says, "I hope the regulators do their job and block it," when Microsoft is trying to barter a deal with them. They're saying, "Listen, it's not going to be off of your platform. Here's 10 years commitment that we're going to remain on the PlayStation. You're going to have parity day and date. Don't worry. Anything you want, man. Just know that Call of Duty will remain on the PlayStation." But you have this guy saying this. Previously, he's documented in the emails saying that he doesn't believe this is a play on exclusives. It's more about the mobile market and Candy Crush. But now he has a change of heart. Now he's flying out and talking to the regulatory boards instead of flying out to this trial and speaking on this case. And you know why he didn't fly to this trial to speak on this case? Because he knew that Microsoft's lawyers would rip him to shreds. It's very evident. And if you're listening to this case today, you can see it. And things don't get better. Microsoft lawyers bring up the email between Jim Ryan and Chris Deering, a former CEO from Sony Computer Entertainment, discussing the announcement of Microsoft's Activision Blizzard deal from last year. It's not an Xbox exclusivity play at all. They're thinking bigger than that. They have the cash to make moves like this. I spent a fair amount of time with both Phil Spencer and Bobby Kotick over the past day, and I'm pretty sure they will continue to see Call of Duty on the PlayStation for many years to come. Deere replied, "This deal would cement Microsoft as a player in the mobile market. It strikes me more of a Candy King play than Call of Duty." Ryan doesn't disagree. So right there, we have evidence. This is like catching him putting his hand in the cookie jar and saying he didn't steal the cookie. This is significant. This unravels what he said. This makes him officially Jim Lion Ryan. Later on, he'll get to the crying. Right now, he's just doing the lying. Sony hedge against Game Pass. We're now looking at notes from the meeting from the Fidelity investors from February 2022. Jim Ryan discusses the importance of first-party content to fend off competition from Game Pass. One of the reasons why we're investing massively in first-party development and publishing is to provide us with an edge against pressure of historic business model. Having a business model where you own elements from the top to the bottom increases your ability to be self-determined. Microsoft's lawyer asked, "Do you think it would be better for Microsoft Activision games to remain on PlayStation?" Jim Ryan replies, "Yes, I do." Now, Microsoft's lawyer said, "So do you believe it's in Microsoft's best interest to make Activision games available on multi-platforms?" Jim Ryan replied, "I don't agree with that." Now we're starting to see Crying Ryan making an appearance. Now, Microsoft's lawyer followed up asking, "So if you were running Xbox, would you recommend making Call of Duty or other Activision games exclusive to Xbox and PC?" He answers, "That's a hypothetical question." Microsoft's lawyer, "So do you have an answer?" Ryan goes, "I don't have enough knowledge." So this is where Jim Ryan starting to cry. He's entering the matrix, starting to dodge these questions, and it's unbelievable. So you're saying you don't think it's in Microsoft's best interest to keep these games on the PlayStation, but you're now asked, if you were in that position, would you do the same thing? You can't have it both ways. And number one, we all know that it's not in Microsoft's best interest to take those games off of the PlayStation when you yourself know that it doesn't make economical sense. It's not like you're some nobody that doesn't know anything about running a business. you know that it's not a viable option for Microsoft to remove that game from your platform. But you do know that it will give them an edge with Xbox Game Pass, with their cloud service. That you do know. And you can answer that. And that was asked on the stand today. They asked him, so you're worried about the cloud and these games being in the cloud, and you think that it's exclusive if the game is in the cloud. Now make that make sense. If a game is in Game Pass, it's an exclusive. If it's on all platforms because it's in Game Pass. And they were questioned on this. She was saying, so can't you put this in your own service if you wanted to? So we'll get into that. Let's just get up here. Now, Jim Ryan is speaking to those Fidelity investors, saying publishers don't like Xbox Game Pass. I talked to all publishers and unanimously they do not like Game Pass because it's value destructive. He defends that comment by saying it's very commonly held view by publishers. Now, Microsoft lawyer said, so you have no reason to think that Mr. Kotick would put Call of Duty on Game Pass if this transaction was not completed. Jim Ryan says correct. Now, Jim Ryan also said to the investors he was expecting more than 25 million Xbox Game Pass subscribers and that Sony's 50 million PlayStation Plus subscriber during the investors meeting. Now, this was his reason for not even asking Activision to put that game in their subscription service because it is destructive to the value of games. Ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And I think what Microsoft is trying to get at here is I think when Bobby Kotick takes a stand, he's probably going to say that I did offer them this game in their subscription service. So we're going to have another contradiction here. Now, that's just my thoughts on it. But the fact that this guy said that publishers don't like the service tells me that he doesn't like the service too, which makes sense because they don't put their games day and date in that service because they want $70 from you guys. So all you guys out there defending Sony and saying that they're the best thing ever, they're the ones that want to raise the prices of games, and they don't like Game Pass because you can get games for cheaper. You can subscribe to a service and play those games without having to pay $70. And they don't like that because they can't compete with it, or they don't want to compete with it. Now, Jim Ryan confirms that Sony had some shipping constraints in 2021, as well as the Xbox Series X and S. But because of that, Xbox beat the PlayStation 5 for around 3 months. He says there's no other time during the last generation on where Xbox sales have materially exceeded the PlayStation 5. Now, this is common knowledge. We all know that the PlayStation 5 is outselling the Xbox Series consoles. And once again, this is a reason why Microsoft should be allowed to compete. Why is the FTC protecting Sony's interests when they're the #1 console maker in this space? They're #1 in gaming in the US compared to Microsoft. All over the world compared to Microsoft. How is the FTC protecting their interests? How are they going to convince this judge that Microsoft doesn't have the right to compete? PlayStation now has a subscriber base of 3 million users. He predicts that cloud gaming won't be meaningful at least until 2025. Now, his exact words were cloud technology will become a meaningful component of gamers have access to their games between 2025 and 2035. We're making significant investments in cloud in anticipation of becoming a very meaningful way on how gamers access their games. Sony recently started testing cloud streaming for PlayStation 5 with plans to add this feature to its PlayStation Plus premium subscription. So they kind of proved Microsoft's point that cloud gaming is not a big thing. They were actually pressed a little bit harder on this. Like, can you put down a date? And he went on to say nobody can predict when cloud gaming is going to be of a significant meaning. I think it's going to be between 2025 and 2035. I don't know. And nobody can tell you that. He actually said that. Yet you have the FTC saying that cloud gaming is a big thing and that Microsoft has a monopoly on it. How do you have a monopoly on a business that isn't even really that successful yet? It's like 1 to 5% of gamers. Make it make sense. I'm trying to give you the most information, but it's a long read. So like usual, I'll leave it in the link in the description down below. You can check out Tom Warren at TheVerge.com and you can see his complete breakdown. Now let's just do a quick recap. Now he says Sony is wary of sharing the PlayStation 6 info with Microsoft. We went over all of that with the Minecraft dev kits and how possibly in the future Call of Duty developers will not get a PlayStation 6 dev kit. Sony's alarm bells began ringing for Activision around August 2022. What does he think about Starfield exclusivity? He's not crazy about it, but he doesn't think it's anything out of the norm. Jim Ryan confirms that he told Activision's Bobby Kotick he wanted the Microsoft deal blocked. That was pretty good. The Sony bombshell email was revisited right after Jim Ryan was talking to the FTC, which is just crazy and contradicts a lot of his testimony. Publishers don't like Game Pass. We're gonna have to dig into this to see how true this is. I think it's more of a Sony doesn't like Game Pass because it allows Microsoft to compete with them, and it kind of goes against their business model of selling $70 games. Xbox beat the PlayStation 5 for 3 months in 2021. I don't think that's really anything notable. Jim Ryan says cloud gaming won't be a thing till at least 2025, maybe up to 2035. Now, he was pressed harder on that, and he couldn't put down a definitive date, and he said nobody can. And like I said, it's because this market just doesn't exist yet. Now we're back to the Nintendo Switch again, and Microsoft's lawyer is questioning the FTC's economic expert, Mr. Robin Lee, if he defines the PlayStation Xbox as high performance in the console markets that are separate to the Nintendo Switch. Now, they've been arguing back and forth on this, trying to say that Nintendo is not a direct competitor. Now, I agree with Tom Warren here. It is and it isn't. First of all, it is because it's a console. It's in the same space as PlayStation and Xbox. It is not in the same power envelope. And yes, it doesn't play the same games. And I think the point that the FTC is trying to make is that the Switch is not capable of playing Call of Duty. Therefore, Microsoft is lying. And we all know that's not the case. Now, the FTC also argued that if you strip down a lot of the components to Call of Duty, it's essentially a different game. And Matt Booty and others, they spoke on this, and basically you could get it to run on the Switch. It would have some things maybe stripped out, I would say like the graphic fidelity, but we already know this. It's the Switch. We know it's not the most graphical console in the world, and people still buy it. So it wouldn't be degraded on that platform because that's what they're used to. Their games are not known for graphics. And once again, I think this is really about the next Switch. I think Call of Duty will be on the next Switch because it will be a lot more powerful than the current Switch. And I would assume it'll be able to run Call of Duty. And if Microsoft guarantees that this game is going to be on their platform, they're going to make sure that it runs on the Switch or the next Switch. So that's what the FTC is really trying to get at. And that's why some of this questioning, it can be quite boring. But they're trying to elicit the answer that they want so they can present it in their closing arguments. Now, Microsoft's lawyer Beth Wilkinson is asking Dr. Robin Lee about the quantitative models he used to create his report. Dr. Lee predicts how PlayStation players would switch to Xbox if Call of Duty was exclusive to the Xbox. On average, Call of Duty titles during the Generation 8 Xbox share would increase by 8.9%. Such a loss would come from PlayStation losing players, as Call of Duty isn't available on the Nintendo Switch. Wilkinson argues that Dr. Lee's model takes the data from older console, then applies it to the new consoles. Wilkinson also points out that Dr. Lee doesn't have models to share shift in multi-game subscriptions or cloud gaming where titles like Call of Duty are taken away. Now, when you were watching this in real time, I'm not going to lie to you guys, my head was kind of spinning. He was just all over the place. So basically he was using Xbox One numbers and PlayStation 4 numbers and somehow put it into his model that would affect the PlayStation 5 and Series X. He didn't have Series X or S data for that certain model. It was just all over the place. And even the judge jumped in here and had to clarify some questions and even ask some questions of her own because it was just all over the place. It wasn't a good look at all. And once again, the FTC, they present somebody in court and they just get raveled by Microsoft's lawyers. It's unbelievable to see it happening, or I should say, hear it happening in real time in the courts. Okay, so Tom Warren attempts to break down Lee's model, which I have to give him credit for because it's confusing. Now, the share model measures overall North American Gen 8 consoles, so Xbox One, PlayStation 4, then applies it to a likely outcome if Call of Duty was removed from the PlayStation. It predicts the console market that would be a share shift of 8.9 percentage points based on past sales data from the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 consoles. This share model uses only North American data and no assumed conversion rate. The share model doesn't predict content library share shift nor cloud gaming. So his model is just all over the place. It doesn't include the cloud. He doesn't include Nintendo. He doesn't include PC. He doesn't include Xbox Series X or S numbers. They also use some numbers from the CMA. And people were saying, oh, you're making it up. The CMA and the FTC, they're not working together. It's clear. Like, they're actually using the CMA survey numbers in their American court hearing. Okay, so this is the foreclosure model. The foreclosure model measures global console sales that include Gen 9, Xbox Series S, X, and PlayStation 5 to predict the future. Inputs on the foreclosure models aren't the same as the share models, as it has a conversion rate that assumes 20% of Call of Duty players would convert to Xbox. So I don't know how you get to this number and say, yeah, you know what, just 20% of them would switch to Xbox and they would stop playing on the PlayStation if the game was exclusive. You don't know that. You can't predict those numbers. In this foreclosure model, it predicts a share shift of 5.5 percentage points. The model is designed to work out what point that benefits would exceed the cost if Microsoft were to withhold Call of Duty from the PlayStation. The foreclosure model doesn't predict content library shift nor cloud gaming. So their numbers are all over the place. Like I said, they don't include Nintendo, the cloud, library shift. So it's not accurate right off the bat. I don't know how you get to the 20%. And first of all, we know that Microsoft is not going to remove this game from the PlayStation. They would lose too much money. Even if that 20% were to come over, that's not going to make up for all the money that they lose not having this game on the PlayStation. These are just the facts. They offered them a contract. Sony does not want to sign the contract. Now, Tom Warren goes on to say it's a little hard to follow precisely, as some of the numbers are redacted in the deposition as they're sensitive, and Microsoft lawyer is drawing diagrams I can't see. But Microsoft's lawyer argues that if Dr. Lee is wrong about the 20% conversion rate in the foreclosure model, if it has 15%, then does that give Xbox not a positive for incentive or a reason to withhold Call of Duty? Microsoft's lawyer introduced the UK Competition and Market Authority's analysis of Call of Duty being Xbox exclusive and whether it would financially benefit Microsoft. Now, the CMA had originally concluded that Microsoft's strategy to withhold Call of Duty from PlayStation would be profitable, but Microsoft wasn't happy with that and publicly criticized the regulator's math, and the CMA then adjusted its financial model, sided with Microsoft, leaving just cloud concerns for it to decide to block the merger. Microsoft's own survey had a wider number of users at the CMA's own survey, which included a number of people who do not play Call of Duty. So how do you have a survey that is about, or you're saying is about Call of Duty, but it doesn't include any Call of Duty players or data? All the numbers in the UK's case, they're just wrong. We know that. Their math is off. They added cloud users into that, and it's just off. I don't want to get all into it. This case is just a mess. Honestly, the FTC's case it's just not well prepared. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't do a lot of research. They clearly didn't. Because if they actually did and they dug into the information, they'd be finding out what we're finding out right now in the courts. That this is all about nothing. That this is Sony crying that Microsoft is going to have access to Call of Duty and all of these other titles, and that it's going to benefit their Game Pass service. Okay, we're back with Dr. Lee after a brief lunch break, and Microsoft's lawyer is now questioning Dr. Lee, this time about Microsoft's 10-year offer for Call of Duty on the PlayStation. In my analysis, I look at the agreement that has been signed, says Dr. Lee. Microsoft's lawyer points out that there are agreements that have been signed between Microsoft and competitors. Microsoft's lawyer is keen to point out the agreement of Final Fantasy XVI. Now, Microsoft's lawyer said one of the things Sony could do is take a game that was on multiple platforms and pay for it to be on PlayStation, right? Dr. Lee, this is my understanding. Do you have a particular example? Microsoft's lawyer responded, do you know the game Final Fantasy XVI? Dr. Lee, I've heard of that game. Microsoft's lawyer went on to say, do you know that it was on Xbox and PS5? Dr. Lee, I don't know that console that it was released on. After this exchange, Dr. Lee is asked whether exclusive games are harmful to competition. Dr. Lee admits that exclusivity can have both pro and anti-competitive effects. Now, once again, the FTC has to prove their case. After a few questions, is already starting to dismantle Dr. Lee. And it gets worse. Now, will Call of Duty be removed from the PlayStation? Microsoft asked Dr. Lee's opinion on whether Call of Duty will be on the PlayStation after the merger. I don't agree that it will be on PlayStation for certainty, Dr. Lee argued, that it's likely a foreclosure for Activision content it will occur in the console market. Now, Judge Corley cuts in and wants to get a clearer answer. Lee says it's likely that Activision content will be foreclosed, but he can't say whether Call of Duty is likely to be withdrawn from the PlayStation. And like we all know from the financials, from everything we're seeing in court, from what we as gamers just know. Call of Duty is not going to be removed off of the PlayStation. The revenue that it creates is just too much money. Microsoft, when they bought this company, they also put that into consideration. All of the revenue that they make off of it being on the PlayStation. They don't want that revenue to stop coming in. Having it in Game Pass is going to be good for their service. It's also going to be good for the Xbox brand. But the PlayStation players are not going to lose anything. They're still going to be able to play it day and date on the PlayStation. They're still going to have all the features that is on the Xbox console. They might not have the option to play it in Game Pass and they got to pay $70 for it, but they can still play it day and date the way that they play it now. Judge Corley kind of cut in a lot. She was adding extra questions to get a lot of clarity because this guy, he was just all over the place. So the judge, she intervenes once again. She goes, there's a lot of popular games, not just Activision. Is there no way of predicting what game's going to be the most popular game? Judge Corley wants to know why Dr. Lee hasn't analyzed Call of Duty separately. Dr. Lee says Microsoft is likely to foreclose Call of Duty and other Activision titles, yet not proving how he came to this conclusion. His analysis, he doesn't have Call of Duty data in there. He's just saying, yeah, take my word for it. They're going to take it off the PlayStation. You know, Jim Ryan told me that, and I trust Jim Ryan. I have beers with him on Thursday. And if he says it, it is like that, man. And it's going to happen. And I can even predict a percentage point. 20% of people are going to buy Xbox consoles. And how dare they compete with Sony and the PlayStation? No, we can't have that. I mean, this is anti-competitive. Make it make sense. Now they start to dig into the foreclosure harm and price increase potential, and the FTC asked, can a partial foreclosure harm consumers? Dr. Lee responded, like exclusivity, it can be both pro and anti-competitive effects. The FTC also asked, do you think partial foreclosure can affect competition? And Dr. Lee replied, yes. Now the FTC moves on to Call of Duty on Xbox and PC, and Judge Corley intervenes again and wants to know why people simply switch to PC, where they can play their games and get more value out of PC, do more productivity, and more. Judge Corley, the Xbox Series S pricing is closer to the Switch. Does it compete with the Switch? Dr. Lee asked, there's a Series X and PS5 and Series S still in the market. So if you're thinking about a price increase on the Series X, the customer who buys the X console, they're more likely to switch to the PlayStation 5 or to the Switch. So this decides the market definition. Evaluate a price increase on any of the products in the market. Now this was all said by Dr. Lee, and he continues to argue that he models and provides evidence that around 10 to 15% of folk who leave Xbox would go to PlayStation. I'm just going to cut it off right here. His quick maths just don't make sense. And I kind of got bored with his testimony because, like I said, it was just inconsistent. It just didn't make sense. You're just seeing that the FTC's argument was so weak. They had no preparation. And when you just don't have the facts, this is how it turns out in court. Now, will Microsoft block Activision content on rival cloud and subscription services? The FTC questions Dr. Lee around the likeliness of Microsoft keeping Activision content off rival subscription and cloud gaming services. It is more likely because of a merger than an absent merger to engage in foreclosure of Activision content for your library services and cloud streaming services. So why didn't Dr. Lee include cloud and subscription in his modeling? Both are relatively new compared to console, and the lack of really good data for the services made it very difficult to perform something that I would review as reliable. Now, Judge Corley wants to know about the subscriptions being a separate market, as the FTC argues, because aren't they just a different way to pay for the same games? Dr. Lee compares Xbox Game Pass to something like Netflix, and whether Microsoft might be incentivized to raise prices if it's key content like Activision games, or whether consumers would want to switch to another subscription or buy games individually. Now, the FTC says it's difficult to judge or harm a market like the cloud, as it's a market that is still seeing new competition. It is growing, it's brand new. We know this. We've said this many times again. Sorry, I'm just going to rant a little bit here, which brings me back to the CMA and their whole argument. Anyways, he goes on to say that he argues that cloud gaming is a separate market, whereas Microsoft says it's simply a feature. Microsoft acquiring Activision content could have an impact on a smaller cloud gaming services and emerging ones. This just hurts my head, honestly, because you have to create a sector first for anyone to even compete in it. So you're trying to just cut their legs out right at the beginning and say you can't even run. Forget it. That's just ridiculous. I know it might suck that you didn't think of this strategy, the opponents for this deal not going through, but it is what it is. This market is very small. You heard Xbox say that hardly any gamers use it, and when they use it, they're using it as they're downloading their game to play the game to see how it plays. And then most of them don't ever use it again or don't use it for that game again. It's a very small market. I can say I've hardly used the cloud. I've used it a few times, yes, but I like to play my games natively or on my handhelds or on my PC or on my Xbox. I don't really want to play my games in the cloud. Yeah, it's cool that you can do it. Sometimes you have some downtime, sure. But the majority of gamers are not playing their games this way. So this is definitely not a reason to block this acquisition. Okay, so we have another recap here. They're arguing about Nintendo Switch again. Please make it stop. Yeah, I think I just skipped over most of the Nintendo Switch stuff. I already told you why they're trying to make this argument, and I just can't do it. It just doesn't make sense. Nintendo Switch is a competitor. It's just not the same power as the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, and it doesn't necessarily have the same consumers. But the consumers aren't all little kids. They just like a specific type of game, a genre that is available on Nintendo. That's it. If Call of Duty was available on the Switch, you better believe they'd be playing it. Because there's a lot of adults that play the Switch, not all 4-year-olds. Dr. Lee's models, they gave me a headache just trying to explain it to you guys. I'm just being honest. I really had to look at what I was reading and what I was hearing and try to make sense of it. And it was difficult because it was all over the place. He's looking at CMA's charts that don't include Call of Duty players. All of his maths were off. He's looking at Xbox One and PlayStation 4 and then correlating it to the Series X and S, yet not having any data on the Series S and X in the certain, chart or demonstration he was trying to do. Was ridiculous. Call of Duty, they keep arguing that it's going to be removed from the PlayStation. It's not going anywhere. He offered a 10-year contract. Cut it out. Will Microsoft block Activision content on rival cloud and subscription services? Didn't they just sign a contract for all cloud providers to have access to this game? Now, I don't even know how much time I'm clocking making this video, but today there was a lot of testimony. Now, next they bring up Nvidia, head of GeForce Now. Now he's appearing via a video deposition. And I'm just going to try to skim through this part. Now, he basically talks about the cloud, and he goes, Microsoft had previously kept its own games off of GeForce Now to compete with xCloud. Now, they're basically talking about Xbox removing their games from GeForce Now. During the beta, they were allowed to have the games on there. After the beta, I guess they continued to have those games on there and added more titles, which we already heard from Matt Booty. It was not a deal. They didn't sign an agreement to have those games on GeForce Now, so they were there illegally. So Microsoft wanted them removed. Now the FTC thinks it's doing something here, bringing on Nvidia, who is now for this deal, when we have context already behind what was happening, why Microsoft wanted those games removed off the service, are trying to say, hey, look, they removed Minecraft. They took it off the service. They took their Xbox games off this cloud service. You can't trust these guys. They're no good. Like we never heard Matt Booty's testimony. Like we don't have context to what happened. Now, Tom Warren says Microsoft had previously kept its own games off GeForce Now to not compete with xCloud, but the Xbox maker signed an important deal with Nvidia early this year to bring its Xbox PC games to GeForce Now. Phil Eisler, who leads the GeForce Now team at Nvidia, is discussing its cloud gaming platform. We found over time that we get closer and closer to the quality playing locally. Our cloud gaming services are more powerful than consoles, so we're able to run higher frame rates and add more visual effects. In terms of latency improvements, he added, well, one of them is a way we've improved the frame rate. So originally it was 30 frames per second, then we increased it to 60, and now 120 up to 240 FPS. Now, I gotta be honest with you guys, I didn't even know that these guys were capable of doing 240 FPS over the cloud. That is pretty amazing. And what he goes into is that basically when we're doing it at 240 FPS, the game is refreshing much faster, so you're feeling a lot less latency. So if the game is running at like 240 FPS, you're not going to really feel the latency. You're just not. It's going to appear a lot smoother. Now, of course, there's going to be some latency there, but playing it, you're not going to have a perceived latency. So as a tech guy, that kind of impressed me there. Now, Activision games were available on GeForce Now during its initial beta period before being pulled from the service. We had a number of those Activision games on the service at beta. Did Activision agree to make those games available? Asked the FTC. We worked with a contact at Blizzard. They were supportive for the games being there during the beta. Call of Duty games were also on GeForce Now during the beta and were one of the more popular games on the service. Now, you guys got to remember, this is actually a video deposition, so it's not live, it's not real time in court. So these questions were already asked months ago. Now, Microsoft is up next, and they asked Mr. Esler, who leads GeForce Now, about the agreement earlier this year for Xbox PC games on its streaming services. The agreement entitles us to the content provided the transaction completes on the Activision side. We have already begun working with Microsoft on board their first-party title, so we're confident that we'll solve our concerns there. Once again, just kind of invalidating all of the testimony from Nvidia, they've come to an agreement. They're going to work together. Microsoft titles are going to appear on GeForce Now. The cloud service is not a huge service anyways. This is just beginning. This is good for competition. This is good for consumers. It's good for gamers. It's good for business. It just doesn't make sense what the FTC is doing here. You know that Nvidia is now for this deal. Your case is so weak that you had no choice but to still bring them on the stand, even though you know it's like a Hail Mary. You're not building your case. You're not putting any type of evidence out there that is supporting your theories. And the judge has a lot of questions, as she asked them today. As she asked a lot of questions, which I was surprised. She's really into the details of this case. And she was asking questions to the FTC, like, explain to me what you're trying to say, because it doesn't make sense. So I'm just trying to understand. Can you please explain it to me again? And that doesn't bode well for the FTC's case. Now, next up, Microsoft presents its own economic expert. And as you can expect, things are just going to get worse for the FTC. Now, Dr. Bailey says that Call of Duty is not essential, critical, or a must-have. It's not a unicorn. Now, that's opposite what we've heard from Dr. Lee earlier, and even Judge Corley described Call of Duty as a unicorn previously. Dr. Bailey says Dr. Lee's markets are too narrow, and the merger will expand the reach of content. Now, on the screen here, we have, I guess this is from Michael Acton, and he has a breakdown of what happened in court. So Nintendo is at 18.5%, EA 16.1%, Take-Two is at 8.4%, Sony is at 7.5%, Activision at 7.4%, so Sony's above Activision, Epic Games 6.1%, Ubisoft 5.1%, Xbox 4.9%. So they're nowhere near the top. Sony is a few slots above them. Now, Microsoft is about to argue that Activision Blizzard acquisition is mainly about the opportunity in mobile. Dr. Bailey is being questioned about the mobile market, and she goes on to say mobile is the largest. It's about 70% of the overall 150 billion gaming market. PC gaming is around 33 billion, console gaming at 28 billion, Xbox is less than 0.5% of mobile gaming revenue. Dr. Bailey goes on to say Activision Blizzard is also very small in mobile gaming, so combined they'll have 3.8% of mobile gaming. So once again, you see why Microsoft wants some of these games to enter the mobile market, because they're going to get some share there. Now, 3.8% is small for sure, and it's small in the space of mobile, but 3.8% of a mobile market that is worth $150 billion is a good profit, and they want to enter it. And you can't stop them from entering it because they got 3.8% if this goes through, which is nowhere near the monopoly that you think or you're claiming that Microsoft is going to get. Now, Dr. Bailey has analyzed telemetry data from Xbox and PlayStation, and Dr. Bailey has been given access to key telemetry data from both PlayStation and Xbox for Call of Duty. Microsoft goes on to argue that the data from the market share and usage shouldn't be limited to just the US, and that it should be global. It reinforces the nexus of competition, and competitive decisions are made not global, nor locally or limited to the United States, says Dr. Bailey. So we know the FTC, they're not including global numbers. It's just the US, so that they can paint the picture that they want to, because in the US, Sony and Microsoft are a lot closer than they are in the rest of the world. But this deal is not just going to affect the US, it's going to affect the world. So all the numbers have to come into play. Now, Dr. Bailey was able to analyze game time to determine if the same games are popular in the US and other parts of the world. And if you look at mostly highly played games, that set of games that are mostly highly played in the US is very similar to the same set that are mostly played games in other countries around the world. Dr. Bailey also confirmed that Dr. Lee also had access to this same data. So it's not looking good. Like, he doesn't include this data. He had access to it. He had access to actual Call of Duty data from the Xbox and PlayStation. We know he didn't add Call of Duty numbers to some of his charts there. He didn't even add Xbox Series X and S to some of his analysis. Is Call of Duty an essential game? Microsoft wants to paint Call of Duty as not all that important because gamers play plenty of other games. Dr. Bailey says there's a good percentage of gamers who are playing more than 10 franchises on the PlayStation. Dr. Bailey also looked at whether Call of Duty players spend more money, something that came up in Dr. Lee's report. Now, apparently in the courts, they're showing two comparisons between Call of Duty and God of War Ragnarok. Both games have been bundled with consoles. Dr. Bailey argues that how often a game is played on the first day is a proxy to how important that game is, but she's not aware of a different game bundle in different US states. That could be a hole in the telemetry analysis here. Now, Call of Duty is an important game and it's a popular game, but there's nothing to suggest it's uniquely important, said Dr. Bailey. She also looked at Nintendo Switch being successful without Call of Duty. The Switch has grown 35% without Call of Duty. Now, once again, this is to go against the arguments of the FTC that if this was removed off of Sony's platform, that they wouldn't be able to continue, that they would lose market share. Yet we have Jim Ryan internally saying that that would not be the case. It would put a small dent in them, that they would still be by far the market leader. Now, once again, you have to prove your case. The FTC is suing Microsoft. They're suing Activision. They have to prove their case. And they are not proving their case. And every time they bring a witness, it's just unraveled right before our eyes. So that's it. Day 3 is over. I gotta say, the testimony today was crazy. Nvidia was a waste of everybody's time, especially when they're now on board for the deal. I don't understand why the FTC presented this, and actually I do understand why they presented this. They don't have anything else. What are they gonna do? Their evidence is poor, and we're seeing this play out in court. Dr. Bailey, she really went in on Dr. Lee. He wasn't including proper data. His points didn't make sense, especially when he's not using all the data and using it correctly, and then using data from the CMA and using data from the cloud and trying to mix them all together. It just wasn't making sense. Jim Ryan was lying, and he also did some crying because he was running around to different regulatory boards. But in the beginning, he was like, I'm not worried about this. Everything is good, man. I believe you, Phil. I believe you, Satya. It's going to stay on the PlayStation. Of course it's going to stay on the PlayStation. It's the PlayStation. COD has to be on the PlayStation. He was confident, man. That's the bottom line. And afterwards, when he saw that this is actually going to bolster their Game Pass, and he's just being petty because he just wants this deal blocked. He said to Bobby Kotick after he said, I'll stay on board after the merger, and I'll ensure that everything runs smooth in this transaction so that you have everything that you had before on the PlayStation, that Call of Duty will be on your platform. Microsoft is offering them 10-year contracts, and you're turning it down. And now we're hearing in court that you said to Bobby Kotick that I don't want a deal, I want this blocked. FTC, do your job. Is unbelievable. Sony is number 1 in the gaming market, in consoles, compared to Microsoft, who is very small compared to them, who is trying to compete. This case is going to fail. The evidence is just not there. Microsoft is now presenting their case. They've already unraveled what the FTC did. At this point, honestly, it's just like kicking them when they're down. Like, they're already down. They're already knocked out. Just call the fight. But that's not the way things work. We have to go through the court proceedings. It's not going to look good for them. Tomorrow, Satya Nadella is going to be on the stand. The CEO of Microsoft. Bobby Kotick is going to be on the stand. Microsoft is going to paint the picture for you. You're going to get the answers on whether or not Call of Duty could ever be on the PlayStation in their cloud service or day 1 in their premium service. Will it ever be there? Could it be there? Was there a possibility? Because Jim Ryan didn't even bother to ask him because he said, I know he doesn't like that type of model. These publishers, they don't like Game Pass. It degrades their games. It devalues them. We can't get the 70. They don't like it because they get less money. And also, we can't charge $70 for it. So we don't like it because then we're going to look really bad with our games at $70 when you can go over to Game Pass. The judge was asking, hey, isn't Game Pass like pretty much not a different service? It's just another way of paying for the game, another way to play the game. She was asking a lot of good questions, and that just tells you that this is not going in the FTC's way, and they're going to lose this case horribly. Now, I've talked enough. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I need to drink some water. Please like, share, and subscribe. And please like the video, man. I see a lot of you guys are watching this video. You're not hitting the like button. Just slap the like button. It's easy. And it helps me out and it lets me know that you guys appreciate what I'm doing. Share this out. I'll see you guys on the next one.